There are times in this life where you have to step out and go it on your own. We've all had those times where your parents or mentors or teachers or those who have led you in the past have done all that they can for you. And the time has come for you to pick up the mantle and go on a journey that is all your own. We've truly all had those moments, times where we realize that we are indeed the adult in the room, right? We're the adult in the room, and we either need to kill the spider, or take charge, or take a stand, or make a decision for the well-being of ourselves and others, because we're the adult now. And what an awful realization that is, hey? We keep looking around for someone who's more adultier than us to step up and lead and do. And it can be with a sinking heart that we realize that we're on our own now. We are the adults that we have been waiting for, and there are times that we feel a bit ill-equipped for that adult task. Almost 30 years ago, 30 years this September, I was in the hospital just having had my daughter, my one and only baby. Now, I was going to say she was the perfect newborn, but that seems arrogant. So she was a perfect newborn, like all newborns are. She was healthy and beautiful and had such a sweet disposition. And it was a magical 3 days. The nurses were great, always there to lend a hand, to help me do what needed to be done. And in fact, I remember with great pride, a few of the nurses had taken quite a shine to my daughter and simply went above and beyond in their care of her. She was kind of like their little pet. On the third day, it was time for us to go home and start out our life as a little family, where once we were 2, now we were 3. And I remember being so happy and excited about this next phase of my life. It was truly, truly wonderful. At least it was until it dawned on me that the nurses weren't coming home with us. These nurses actually expected my husband and I to do all of this by ourselves. How irresponsible of them. What were they thinking? We'd never been parents before. I couldn't even keep houseplants alive. Right? So now here we were, given responsibility for this little 7-pound bundle of life. And as the nurse finished putting our baby in the car seat, as required by law, and began to walk away from the car, I just remember feeling more than a bit overwhelmed. I remember thinking, we're on our own now. That's just how Elisha must have been feeling when he saw Elijah taken up by the whirlwind and that chariot of fire. Whereas he had up until now been able to follow his mentor, as the mentor did all that prophet-type stuff, had all those days to see what it is that prophets actually did. But from here on, he was all alone. He was the adult in the story now. And now it was his time to lead. And I think, too, this must have been how those first disciples felt when Jesus left. They must have felt, we're on our own now. We need to figure this thing out. We need to pick up the mantle and get on with this thing called leading and living the things that Jesus taught. Every person and every generation goes through this. Our mentors have gone on, the times have changed, and we need to figure out how it is that we're going to go the next few miles of our life's journey on our own. And it can feel overwhelming, especially when it dawns on us that we are not our mentors, right? We don't have their gifts and skills. We're different people. We have different skills and gifts. And we're called to lead in a time that's very different than the ones that our mentors had lived through. And so it is, we begin to realize yet again that we're on our own now. While we have learned a lot and benefited from the wisdom of those that came before us, we need to apply what we know to the times in which we are living, and they're very different. And it can feel overwhelming. In so many ways, we as the church, and when I say that I mean the church universal, the Christian church, are having our own Elisha moment. Just like Elisha, we have inherited a living tradition. And now we have to figure out how to keep that precious bundle of life alive and growing and becoming all that it can and all that it's meant to become. It is our turn to pick up the mantle and live and lead in the times that we have been given. That's our lot. But what does that really mean for us as church? Well, to start, I think we need to acknowledge that the Christian church is going through its own grief, lament, and times of upheaval about how to do what we do. It's across the board. Nobody is immune from this. We live in a state of confusion sometimes about what it means when we say we're Christian. Even the name seems to be up for argument these days. We find ourselves wondering what is important and what is just fluff. And then when we see other Christians, some of them making the news for behaving badly and forgetting the one command Jesus gave us, which was to love, right? We find ourselves sometimes looking at them and we think, well, that's not what I believe. So am I right? Or are they right? What's going on? As the known and comfortable ways of being in the church disappear, and they are disappearing, it's clear that we're experiencing that chill wind of being all alone. There was a time in the church, even in my own memory, there was a time of old certainties, a time where there was a faith language that had a place in daily conversation. Family, church, and nation really did seem to have a consistent thread running through them all. Marriages really did seem to stick together. Children and teenagers really needed the church to be a place where they could find a social outlet, meet up with their friends, and maybe learn a thing or two about the faith along the way. This was our own Elijah time. And a lot of us can't necessarily remember it, but boy, we do hear about those good old days. And then it seems there was this whirlwind. Now, the whirlwind, some experts call the whirlwind the 60s. How many of you remember the 60s? Right? But even then, it seems to have been a mighty fine time. The church on the corner still mattered, and their leaders often marched at the head of the social movements of the day. Everybody back then, not me because I was this little, but all the adults in my life read Pierre Burton's The Comfortable Pew. Right? And we all figured out, oh, we're doing church wrong, and we headed out into the world in order to save it, leaving behind our sense of community. But we were out doing really good work, and it was good work. And it felt like we as a world were coming out of the wilderness, and together somehow we would all eventually reach the promised land. Those were great days when the story really seemed to be about us. And a lot of us can't remember it, but boy, do we hear about those good old days a lot. There is grief and lament for even the time of the whirlwind, right? Because at that time it felt real, it was real, and we felt alive in our churches. But that's not our lot, you see, because we are with Elisha. We are on the other side of the Jordan and the other side of the whirlwind. And even if we remember those days fondly, we can't go back to Elijah's time. And we can't spend our lives in the whirlwind. So we need to figure out what it means to pick up the mantle today. To walk from the Jordan, leaving Elijah and our past behind us. What does it mean to leave the good old days behind? There's sadness with that, for sure. I would say that leaving the good old days behind means quite simply that we begin enjoying what's possible now that wasn't possible then. Our whole world has opened up. In the past, being Christian was the same as being Canadian, or so we thought. It was what one simply did. And during the whirlwind, to be a Christian meant that we were people of goodwill. But in Elisha's time, which is where we live, being a Christian has gone back to meaning what it originally meant. You see, we are people who see life differently. We have an alternative vision on what makes for success and what makes for a good life. And we live all of that out in community. We live that out with one another. We view creation as a whole, and that all living things matter, and that all living things have a place, and all are worthy. We believe that God, or the divine, is infused into all people. We believe that peace and loving our neighbor that Jesus talks so much about means we live and work alongside of people who are like us, that we live and work alongside people who have different faiths than us. We live and work alongside people that have no faith at all as we seek to follow the Spirit in new and exciting ways. That's our lot. And this is the mantle that we're being asked to pick up. We are blessed to live in a time where the world really needs us to be exactly who we are. We have nothing but opportunity for growth and for making a difference in the lives of people, because people need us to be who we are, and that we can do. People are curious. People in this modern, fast-paced, multicultural, and pluralistic world have questions, deep and profound questions. They wonder about whether they will ever know true peace. They wonder and worry if their children will have air to breathe, whether they will grow into ethical people and have a good future, a good life. They wonder if there isn't more to this life than what they are currently living. And they wonder how their experiences of God might also be true. People are curious. And you know what? We can help with that. Because we are a community of curious people who care about and are willing to wrestle with the questions that come with living. Yet to do that, we need to live and structure our church lives in brand new ways. You see, the curious don't automatically think of church as a place of community and questions. That's not their first thought. They're not lining up to come here or to any other church on a Sunday, or to a potluck, or a Bible study, or a weekly youth group. Yet if we are to be gospel people to them, then we need to go where they are. It only makes sense. Meet them in their questions. Meet them in their busy lives. Dare to reach out a hand of caring so that they will know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they are not all alone. That in a world where people feel isolated and lonely, that this is a place where they can feel like they belong, because they do belong. It's a place where they can learn to live differently, a place where they can then experience the joy of truly believing that God is with them and that God loves them. This, my friends, is the grand discipleship adventure. What a great line, eh? The grand discipleship adventure. We're on our own now. And while it can be a bit daunting to realize we are the adults that have the task of passing on a living tradition to the next generation, it's a task we know how to do. Because we know how to love. We know how to be together in community. We know the life that can come from being curious enough to ask questions and working out the answers together. And no, the nurses and Elijah are not coming home with us. Right? They're not coming home to help us out. But then again, we don't need them to. We've got this, baby. May it be so in your life and in mine. I'll make